Okay, so the news is breaking right now. The United States has just carried out what they're calling massive precision strikes on Iranian nuclear sites.
Yeah, and this isn't just another headline flickering past, is it? This feels different.
It really does. It's like a tremor. You can almost feel it shaking global markets already. And it definitely raises some urgent questions,
Yeah,
questions about personal finances, investments, really about your peace of mind.
absolutely.
So, welcome to the deep dive. Our mission today really is to unpack the implications of this. It's a significant geopolitical escalation, no doubt about it.
Hmm.
We want to go way beyond the headlines, understand exactly what happened, how markets are reacting right now, what the experts think might happen when U.S. markets open Monday.
Which is the big immediate question for many.
Exactly. And most importantly, what does all this mean for your portfolio, for you listening?
Right.
Our goal here is clarity, concise, thorough understanding. We want to cut through the noise, give you the important nuggets of knowledge, the insights you need, so you feel informed, but hopefully not overwhelmed.
That's the aim. We've pulled together insights from, well, a whole stack of credible sources. ABC News, CNN, AP, NBC, Al Jazeera, BBC, you name it.
And detailed market analysis, too, from pieces like Geopolitical Turmoil, Markets React to Middle East Conflict.
So yeah, we've got a lot to dig into.
Okay, let's unpack this. Where do we even start? I guess with the strikes themselves.
Yeah, you have to start there to grasp the potential impact. We're talking about President Trump announcing successful attacks. This was Saturday, June 22nd, 2025. 3 key Iranian nuclear facilities hit.
And it's crucial, isn't it, that this comes after, what, more than a week of escalating conflict between Israel and Iran, started with Israel's attacks on June 13th.
That's a really critical piece of context. This isn't happening in a vacuum. It's a direct U.S. intervention into an already hot regional conflict.
Right. And the targets chosen, Fordo, Natanz, Isfahan, these weren't random.
Not at all. Highly strategic. Each one plays a distinct critical role in Iran's nuclear program. Targeting them tells you a lot about the intent here.
Okay, let's break those down. Fordo first. What makes that site so important? Why hit that one?
Well, Fordo is kind of infamous. It's a uranium enrichment plant, but it's heavily fortified. We're talking deep underground, carved into a mountainside near Qom.
Wow.
Sources said it's deeper than the Channel Tunnel. So, incredibly hard to hit with conventional weapons.
So hitting it signifies a major escalation in capability used.
Exactly. Its resilience made it a high priority target if the goal was, well, complete neutralization. It's been a big concern for non-proliferation folks for ages because it's so hidden and hard to monitor.
Okay. And then Natanz. That name feels more familiar, maybe?
It probably does. Natanz is Iran's biggest enrichment complex. Huge place. Vast halls full of centrifuges, a lot of it underground too. It's been under the microscope internationally for years.
And it was already hit by Israel on June 13th, right?
It's key.
Yeah.
So the U.S. strike wasn't just a new attack. It was more like an intensification, a follow-up maybe, on a site that was already damaged. Seems aimed at ensuring anything left was, well, destroyed.
Suggests a pretty comprehensive strategy to dismantle their enrichment capacity.
Looks that way. And then you add Isfahan.
Right. How does Isfahan fit in? It's not enrichment, is it?
No, Isfahan is more about research and production. It handles the earlier stages, like preparing the raw materials for enrichment and for reactor use. It's foundational.
So hitting all three raw materials, large-scale enrichment, and the super-hardened site, it sounds like a really concerted effort.
Absolutely. A major blow aimed at the entire nuclear fuel cycle. Not just symbolic, definitely designed for maximum operational disruption.
Okay, let's talk about the weapons used, because this wasn't just, standard precision strikes. They brought out the big guns.
They really did. For the first time ever in U.S. combat history, reportedly, they used the massive ordnance penetrator, the MOP.
The GBU-57 Bunker Buster. This thing is huge, right? Almost 13,000 kilograms.
Yeah, 30,000 pounds. It's specifically designed to penetrate hardened underground targets.
How deep can it go?
It's rated for 18 meters, that's 60 feet of reinforced concrete, or get this, 61 meters, 200 feet of earth.
Unbelievable. And only the B-2 bombers can carry these.
That's right, the B-2 Spirit stealth bombers. Reports are saying nearly half a dozen B-2s dropped about a dozen of these massive bombs, specifically on Fordo.
Wow. That really highlights the determination to get at that buried facility, a whole new level of military commitment there.
No question. And it wasn't just the MOPs.
Right, Tomahawks, too.
Yep. U.S. Navy subs reportedly launched 30 Tomahawk cruise missiles. Those targeted Natanz and Isfahan.
So air and sea, multiple targets, highly sophisticated. But here's where it gets, well, confusing, right? The conflicting reports on how much damage was actually done.
Oh, yes. This is where the information war kicks in, almost as important as the physical strikes.
So President Trump comes out almost immediately.
Declares it a spectacular military success. Says Iran's key facilities were completely and totally obliterated. And adds a warning, future attacks would be far greater and a lot easier.
That's a narrative of decisive victory, projecting power, deterrence.
Exactly. But then you have Iran's side.
A completely different story.
Totally. Iranian officials fired back, saying the sites were evacuated some time ago. They claimed no major blow was suffered because, quote, the materials had already been taken out.
And they mentioned radiation levels?
Yeah, they reported no increase. And crucially, the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, confirmed that. They said no increase in off-site radiation levels. Tehran's message is resilience, preparedness, minimizing the damage.
So what do we make of that? The IAEA confirming no off-site radiation. That's specific. It doesn't necessarily mean the facilities weren't wrecked.
Precisely. It's a factual detail, but limited. It doesn't tell us about structural integrity or if operations actually stopped. It really highlights how much of this is strategic messaging. The U.S. wants to show overwhelming force. Iran wants to show defiance.
The actual damage assessment will take time, obviously. But the global reactions, they were immediate and pretty intense.
Immense. And really revealing about where different countries stand.
Let's start with Iran's response.
Mm-hmm.
It was strong.
To say the least. Swift, absolute condemnation. Outrageous, lawless, grave violation of the UN Charter, international law, the NPT, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty.
Asserting their right to self-defense, warning of everlasting consequences.
And the really alarming part, rhetorically at least, is the reported threat that every American citizen or military personnel in the Middle East is now seen as a legitimate target.
That's a major escalation in language, not just diplomatic anymore.
No, it's a direct threat, raises the stakes significantly.
And their foreign minister, Arachi, he accused the U.S. of being involved with Israel's earlier attacks from day one, saying negotiations were just a cover.
Yeah, painting a picture of pre-planned aggression. And then there's the really serious talk from Iran about potentially withdrawing from the NPT.
What would that mean, realistically?
It would be huge. I mean, Iran basically walks away from international nuclear oversight. Could seriously accelerate fears of a regional arms race. It's a very big threat to make.
Okay, so that's Iran. What about Israel? Their reaction was predictable, I suppose.
Unwavering support. Prime Minister Netanyahu called the U.S. strikes historic. Said they demonstrated awesome and righteous might. Fulfilled his promise to destroy Iran's nuclear facilities. He even said they'd change history. Classic peace through strength message.
So these two polar opposite reactions. Iran threatening dire consequences, Israel celebrating, and the rest of the world mostly calling for calm.
Largely, yes. The UN Secretary-General Guterres expressed grave alarm, called it a dangerous escalation, a direct threat to international peace, reiterated no military solution, urged de-escalation, diplomacy, standard but urgent UN message.
The G7 tried to balance, right? Saying Iran can't have nukes, but also calling for de-escalation.
Yeah, walking that line. But some major powers were much more direct in their criticism of the U.S.
Like China.
China strongly condemned it. Violations of the UN Charter, urged ceasefire, dialogue. Russia went even further. Strongly condemned the strikes, called them a gross violation of international law.
And Russia added something else quite concerning, didn't they?
They did. Said they wouldn't stop Tehran pursuing nukes, and even suggested, quite vaguely, that some countries are ready to supply Iran with nuclear weapons. Didn't say who.
Wow, that's destabilizing, to put it mildly. Hints at potential proliferation, shifting alliances maybe.
It's deeply concerning. Pakistan also condemned the strikes, violation of international law, grave concern.
Meanwhile, you had a lot of other countries, European allies, others urging diplomacy.
A broad chorus, really. The EU, Germany, Italy, Netherlands, UK Starmer, India's Modi, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Oman, Cuba, Venezuela, Mexico, Turkey, Japan, all expressing deep concern, calling for restraint, de-escalation, diplomatic solutions, widespread fear of this spiraling.
And what about regional players? Hamas, Houthis?
They condemned the U.S. strikes, as expected given their ties to Iran. The Houthis went further, threatened to attack U.S. ships in the Red Sea if the U.S. attacks Iran again. Lebanon's president warned of wider regional conflict. These are potential flashpoints.
Okay, let's bring it home. Domestic reactions in the U.S., pretty divided, right?
Deeply divisive, yeah. Reflects the broader political split. President Trump, obviously, hailed it as a spectacular military success. Got immediate praise from top Republicans. Pence, Graham, Cruz, Speaker Mike Johnson.
Speaker Johnson argued the imminent danger justified acting without Congress.
He did. Said it outweighed the time it would take to get authorization. Sidestepping Congress, basically.
But that immediately drew fire from Democrats.
Oh, yeah. Big time. House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries accused Trump of misleading the country, risking a disastrous war. AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, called it absolutely and clearly grounds for impeachment. Said it was a grave violation of the Constitution and war powers.
Bernie Sanders called it grossly unconstitutional, said the president can't just declare war unilaterally.
And it wasn't just Democrats. A few Republicans, like Warren Davidson, Thomas Massie, also questioned the constitutionality. So bipartisan concern about executive power in matters of war.
It's that classic tension, isn't it? President's authority versus Congress's war powers, especially when action's taken without explicit approval.
Exactly. And beyond the politics, there are real immediate security worries here at home. Officials are bracing for potential retaliation. The next 48 hours are seen as particularly concerning.
What kind of retaliation are they most worried about?
Cyber attacks are high on the list. DHS warned that Iranian government-linked hackers might target U.S. networks, especially given the perception of U.S. support for Israel. They might go after critical infrastructure.
Like the banking system, energy grid.
Potentially.
Yeah.
Even less sophisticated attacks could cause disruption. The Center for Internet Security also mentioned Iran's proxy groups might hit U.S. interests in the Middle East. They see the direct threat to the U.S. homeland as maybe more limited for those groups, but
there's another threat, right? The homegrown extremist angle.
yeah, the fear of what they call Shia HVE activity, homegrown violent extremists. Individuals, maybe U.S. citizens or foreign nationals here, inspired by these events to launch attacks within the U.S. Very hard to predict or stop.
So DHS is telling critical infrastructure to beef up security immediately.
Right. And we're seeing responses already. New York's Governor Hochul, NYC Mayor Adams, they've announced increased security. More police presence at religious sites, cultural centers, diplomatic locations shows the immediate, tangible impact right here.
Okay. Which brings us finally to the markets, the big question on everyone's mind. What happens Monday morning?
Yeah, the anticipation for the U.S. Open is huge. The widespread expectation among experts, a negative open. S&P 500, Dow, NASDAQ,
yeah,
all likely down.
Just that classic risk-off reaction.
Exactly. Geopolitical uncertainty hits. Investors pull back from riskier assets like stocks. They seek safety. Creates downward pressure. Some analysts are talking maybe 400, 500 points off the indexes initially. A shockwave.
But is that initial drop the whole story? What does history tell us?
Well, it's the crucial insight for investors, I think. That initial drop, that knee-jerk reaction, it's predictable. But markets often recalibrate surprisingly quickly once the shock wears off.
You mean looking back at other crises? Gulf War, 9/11?
Yeah, those events caused sharp, immediate declines. But often, equity markets recover in the following months. The key is whether the conflict stays contained or really escalates.
So Iran's actual response is critical for sustained market direction.
Absolutely. We're likely looking at high volatility ahead. Quick, significant price swings driven by every development, every headline.
Okay, so a likely initial drop, but the longer term depends. Let's look at specific assets. Gold, the traditional safe haven.
Gold is the classic go-to in times like these. Physical commodity holds value when financial markets are shaky. An insurance policy, really.
And it was already high, wasn't it, before this weekend?
Yeah, spot gold was nearing record highs already, around $3,451 an ounce. Driven by the existing tensions Israel-Iran before this, Ukraine-Russia, this just poured fuel on the fire.
So the expectation is it surges even higher now. We're seeing some big forecasts. Bank of America talking $4,000 an ounce in the next year. Goldman Sachs, $3,700 by end of 25, $4,000 by mid-26.
Those are significant projections, yeah.
Yeah.
Reflects expectations of continued strong demand. But there's a small caveat from some analysts.
Oh.
Well, they suggest that after an initial jump on Monday, gold could actually end the week lower if there's no major re-escalation from Iran.
Yeah. Why would that happen?
A stronger U.S. dollar, which we'll get to, and potentially higher treasury yields, could squeeze gold if too many people piled in. A consensus position becoming vulnerable to profit-taking if things calm down slightly.
Interesting. So immediate outlook bullish, but watch for that potential pullback if things don't escalate further.
Exactly. It's about that immediate reaction versus a sustained trend.
Okay. Now, oil. This feels like where the impact could be really widespread, felt by everyone. Huge upward pressure expected.
Definitely. The driving force is just fear. Fear of disruptions to global oil supply, especially if Iran retaliates by hitting energy infrastructure in the region. oil fields, refineries, shipping.
But the biggest fear relates to the Strait of Hormuz, right?
That's the absolute nightmare scenario for oil markets. That narrow waterway, what is it, 21 nautical miles wide at its narrowest?
Tiny, considering what goes through it.
About a fifth of the world's daily oil supply.
Right.
Plus tons of liquefied natural gas. Any disruption there, even temporary, boom, immediate severe impact on global supply. Instant price shock.
And we're already seeing signs. Some derivative tracking oil swings jumped almost 9% right after the strikes.
Yeah, IG weekend markets showed that surge. Some projections have WTI crude opening around $80 a barrel Monday, just based on the weekend news.
But what if it gets worse? What are the escalation scenarios for a price?
Well, even with moderate escalation, say, the conflict stays contained but tensions are really high, you could see a big risk premium. Citi estimates if the conflict cuts supply by 3 million barrels a day for months, oil could hit $90.
That's still a big jump. But the extreme scenario, closing Hormuz.
That's the one that keeps people up at night. Experts like Bloomberg Economics, Oxford Economics, they warn crude could soar past $130 a barrel, maybe higher.
And the impact of that, not just gas prices.
Oh no, massive inflationary pressure across the board. It could push U.S. inflation, the CPI, near 4% or even 6%. JP Morgan models Brent crude hitting $120, $130 in that scenario. A huge global economic shock.
And that inflation spike would be a massive headache for central banks, like the Fed.
A major headache, is putting it mildly. It could force them to delay or even rethink interest rate cuts everyone's hoping for. A direct blow to fighting inflation globally.
So higher oil, potential inflation, what does that do to the U.S. dollar?
The dollar is actually expected to strengthen, partly because of deleveraging flows.
What's that exactly?
It's when global uncertainty spikes, capital flows back into the world's main reserve currency, the dollar seeking safety and liquidity. Plus, the U.S. is the world's biggest crude producer, so it benefits relatively from higher oil prices. Both support the dollar.
Okay. And U.S. Treasuries, government bonds, usually a safe haven too.
Right, you'd expect an initial knee-jerk haven bid. People buy treasuries for safety, price goes up, yield goes down.
But that might not last.
It might not, unless the conflict really escalates further. If oil prices spike significantly and stay high, inflation fears could mount. That could actually push yields back up as markets start thinking the Fed might have to keep rates higher for longer or even hike to fight that oil-driven inflation.
So yields are a key indicator to watch for inflation expectations.
Definitely. It's a delicate balance.
Okay. Beyond the big picture assets, what about specific sectors? Who wins, who loses?
Well, the likely winners are pretty clear. The energy sector, think ExxonMobil, ConocoPhillips, they benefit directly from higher oil prices.
Makes sense.
And defense contractors, too. Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman. Geopolitical tension often means more defense spending, more orders. Good for their bottom line.
And the losers.
Companies that are really sensitive to fuel costs and consumer confidence. Airlines, like United. Cruise lines, like Carnival or Norwegian.
Higher fuel costs hit their profits directly.
And if people get nervous about the economy or traveling near a volatile region, demand drops. So it hits their revenues, too. They're vulnerable on both fronts.
So, summing up for Monday and beyond, what are the absolute key things for you, for listeners, to keep an eye on?
Number one, absolutely, is Iran's concrete response. Actions, strong statements, threats to shipping.
Yeah.
Anything from Tehran will move markets.
Okay, number two.
U.S. official statements. Is this a one-off strike or part of a broader strategy? That tells us about the potential duration and scope.
And number three, I assume, is Hormuz.
The Strait of Hormuz. Any sign of disruption or direct threats there, that will trigger immediate, sharp reactions, much bigger than what we've seen so far. Those three factors will really drive volatility.
Right. It's a lot to take in. And seeing these headlines, hearing about market drops, it's natural to feel worried about your money.
Of course.
But if there's one piece of advice, the first piece, it has to be, don't panic.
Absolute paramount. Avoid those emotional, hasty decisions. Panic selling. History just shows us again and again it often locks in losses. You sell at the bottom, miss the recovery, it leaves you worse off.
Discipline, sticking to your plan, that's key for long-term investing.
It really is. These geopolitical shocks, they feel huge in the moment, and they're impactful short-term. But they often don't derail a well-thought-out, diversified, long-term strategy.
Markets have shown resilience before, even after major crises.
Consistently. Think back 9/11, Middle East conflicts over the decades. There's an initial shock, yes, but markets tend to adapt and recover over time.
So, the main message, stick to your long-term plan. Your horizon is probably decades, not days. But does an event like this maybe offer a chance to review things, rebalance?
It's actually a very good opportunity for that. Take a calm look at your portfolio. Does your mix of stocks, bonds, other assets, your asset allocation still fit your risk tolerance, your goals?
So if stocks have dropped, maybe it's a chance to buy more to get back to your target.
Potentially, yes, if it fits your plan. Or if something like gold has surged, maybe trim a little to lock in gains and rebalance back. It's about maintaining that strategic balance, not reacting wildly.
What about listeners closer to retirement? Shorter time horizon, different approach.
Yeah, definitely more caution needed there. Having a decent cushion of cash or defensive assets is wise.
Defensive assets meaning high quality bonds, gold.
Exactly. Things less tied to the stock market, they can buffer against downturns. It's not about ditching stocks, but having liquidity so you're not forced to sell riskier assets at a bad time if you need the money. Protects your principal near retirement.
And finally, just understanding that volatility, it's normal, even if it's uncomfortable.
It's part of the deal with investing, unfortunately. Markets react to news, and big geopolitical events are major drivers of short-term swings. The key is staying informed, understanding why things are moving, but not letting fear dictate your actions.
We use terms like risk off today.
Right, that's investors moving from riskier things like stocks to perceived safe havens, gold, treasuries, the dollar.
And deleveraging flows.
That's the money flowing back into the U.S. dollar, specifically during global stress because it's the world reserve currency.
Right.
Safety and liquidity become paramount. Understanding these patterns helps you anticipate market behavior rather than just reacting emotionally.
Okay. So today, we took a really deep dive into these U.S. strikes on Iran. We looked at the military details, the global and domestic reactions, which were pretty varied and strong. And then we focused on the immediate market impact stocks, gold, oil. Looked at the predictions for Monday and hopefully offered some practical advice for you, the investor, navigating this uncertainty.
And I think the core message, it bears repeating, is the perspective. Current events demand attention, understanding, absolutely, but a calm, informed, long-term view is your best asset for your investments.
Volatility is the price of admission for long-term returns, as they say.
It is. Managing that volatility is the key.
So as we wrap up, here's maybe a final thought for you to chew on, something stemming from all this. This situation, with its focus on hitting buried targets, the talk of cyber warfare against critical infrastructure, it really highlights something, doesn't it?
What's that?
Well, as nations get more and more reliant on digital systems, energy grids, finance, everything, how might this evolving threat landscape reshape global cybersecurity and maybe even change how countries cooperate or conflict in the future, moving beyond physical battlefields?
That's a really interesting point. The digital dimension of conflict is becoming increasingly central. How nations defend against that, how they project power digitally. It's a complex layer on top of an already volatile world. Definitely something to keep thinking about.